Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your love. Amen. Jesus said, be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. St. Hugh of Lincoln, our patron saint, was a man who was ready for action and who had his lamp lit. He was born around 1140 in Avalon, France, and died in London in 1200. Canonized 20 years later. He had such an effective impact on the leadership there. When he was young, 8 years old, his mother died. And his father had him with the monks of the Carthusian mother house. And so he really liked living with the monks and kind of got into their rhythm of prayer and worship. And it stuck with him. And when he got older, he joined them and lived a very holy life. And I think he would have been very happy to have stayed a monk in seclusion and not gotten called into service as he did. But King Henry II called him when he wanted to build a monastery for a Carthusian house there in London, and he called on Hugh of Lincoln to do this, and he wasn't of Lincoln then. He became of Lincoln. So he took this see, and like I said, he was not that interested in that, but King Henry appointed him, and so he began a process of trying to make things right for the people. Hugh is a little bit of like an ecclesial Robin Hood, because the king wanted to just take everybody's property away and build this mother house for the Carthusians and not pay the people. And he was like, you can't do that. So he made them pay the people, made the king pay the people and help them, get their situation relocated when they were losing their homes for this monastery. And then he also argued with the king about anything. He had this passion, and he was not afraid to confront a very strong-willed king who most people had difficulty dealing with. One of the biographers wrote that he had not seen anyone quite like Hugh who could bend that rhinoceros's will as Hugh could. And I love reading about him because I always find these little stories, that just make me love him more. And he was a little like St. Francis. He befriended children and animals, looked out for the poor. He was a defender of the Jews. Through history, there's been waves of anti-Semitism, and that was true in his time as well. And he would go out and confront the mobs, that were trying to attack the Jews and call them out on it. And so, like I said, he was kind of a defender, looking to spread justice and God's love where he went. And all of his life's work was grounded in the life of prayer that he had developed as a young boy and with the Carthusians. And he continued those practices throughout his life, seeking God first and prayer and study of the Bible, and then living out of a place of readiness. We too have that opportunity. And I felt like God kind of challenging me this morning when I was praying and in my quiet time, to really prioritize that. I can't tell you how many times the day starts and then I'm like, oh, I got to get back and pray, And it's like, no, I should start and pray. But the dogs want to go out or you check your email, kiss of death. Don't do that the first thing in the morning. But I've had to learn to just separate that time. And I have to learn it again and again and again because I get distracted and pulled away, as I'm sure some of you might have trouble staying focused. But Hugh was focused. And not only, I love the readings they pick for him because, we've got this little thing in Titus. Show yourself in all respects a model of good works. And in your teaching, show integrity, gravity, and sound speech that cannot be censored. And this is how Hugh lived. And then, of course, in Luke's gospel, be dressed for action. Have your lamps lit. Is your lamp lit? Are you dressed for action? Are you ready if God calls on you to minister to someone or to be there to help someone? Are you ready? Are you ready to set aside your own agenda? I can remember when I was in my field ed church, my mentor priest, Graham Smith, he said to me one day, he says, you have your plans for the day and God has his. And he says, and there's always interruptions. And he says, and after a while you learn that the interruptions are the ministry. That's exactly what we're supposed to be about. And God can interrupt my day any day. And he does. And it happened this past week with Carol's family. They had called me early in the morning and said she was fading. And could I come? And I went. And earlier in the week, I tried contacting a few people to do communion visits. No one called me back. My calendar was blank on Thursday. My calendar was set by God that day. And I think God is ready to set our calendar any day. How much are we willing to turn our lives and our time over to God? And what might God do with us if we did? And I know, I look around and I see people that are living their lives faithfully and well and doing the things God calls them to do. And I appreciate that about this community. It's like I feel like I preach to the choir all the time. But for me, and I hope for you, I'm always challenged. Like, what else? As I studied this patron saint of ours, he really had a lot of wonderful things worth emulating. And he kind of had a sense of humor, too. There was one story they tell of when he was in a fight with Henry over something. Henry wasn't speaking to him. So he just stood there waiting. And while he was waiting for the king to acknowledge his presence, he sat there mending a torn glove. And so Hugh just watched, and then he finally said something about how he could see that he was returning to his roots because someone in Henry's family had been a glove maker, a couple generations back. Made Henry laugh. The battle was set aside. So he just had this wisdom about how he approached people. And like I said, this love for the Lord and love for all God's people. And one of the things that Sam Potero has a companion book, Brightest and Best, which is a companion to Lesser Feasts, where he kind of fleshes out the biographies a little bit that we have in our Lesser Feasts and Fasts. One of the things he said here is, in his letter to Titus, Paul exhorts him as a Christian to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, gravity, and sound speech that cannot be censored. Likewise, Jesus urged his disciples to be prepared always for the day of the Lord's coming, remaining watchful, faithful, and wise. The most effective witness is sometimes the quiet, sustained, and ever-present one, ready at any moment for the Lord's return. Translated into our experience, it is to be consistent and continual in our witness, so that anyone who looks at any time might recognize the gospel we represent. The magnificent accomplishments, the grand gestures are but echoes now, dim visions of empires won and lost, built and destroyed. We are inheritors of a quieter revolution in a long line of small voices and tiny gestures. In these noisy times, Hugh reminds us that to be heard, we need only to lower our voice. And it's a challenge in this day to be a voice of reason. There is just so much conflict and discord worldwide, in our own nation, in the political scene. It's just constant. Of course, we're revving up. We got a year of this now, pre-election, where we're just going to hear more and more and more. And so how do we rise above that? And I think Hugh gives us an example to just put God first and then do the things that God gives us to do. I guess Hugh never planned on being a bishop. He didn't want to serve on the king's court. And yet when he was called, he was ready to say yes and serve that see faithfully and well. He was a wonderful man, grounded and focused and prayerful and full of God's love. We would do well to emulate our patron saint.